Hey guys, Primal Swampy here. We're back with another deck tech today featuring Rowlet and his evolved form. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get right into it. Starting with 4 copies of Rowlet. Nothing special, just the basic to evolve into the main attacker. And this deck is going to be the deck I take to the Memphis Regionals in December this year. My first major tournament I've ever been to, so I hope I do good. Wish me luck. Run 3 copies of Dartrix next. Nothing really special, just the middle evolution. But that first attack's not too bad either. Sharp Blade Quill for a single colorless does 20 to one of your opponent's Pokemon. Not too bad. Next up for the main attacker, we run 4 copies of Decidueye GX, mostly for the Feather Arrow ability. Once during your turn, you may put 2 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon, and that ability stacks. So if you have 4 Decidueyes out, you're doing 80 damage to any Pokemon that you would wish to. Then he has the attack Razor Leaf for a grass and 2 colorless, does 90, no effect. Then for a grass, Hollow Hunt GX, put 3 cards from your discard pile into your hand. He does have a weakness to fire, which is really bad because Volcanian's really good right now. And other form of fire decks, but I've been testing a lot online. And I've actually found a way to beat Volcanian pretty consistently using this Pokemon, actually his evolved form. But we run 2 copies of Alolan Vulpix, and the beacon attack's really good for 0 energy. Search your deck for 2 Pokemon, reveal them, and put them into your hand. Shuffle your deck afterward. Next up, we run a single copy of Alolan Ninetales GX. This is the card that helps me beat Volcanian, because you can actually Ice Blade, and if you want to Ice Blade the active, it shoots for weakness, which actually does 100, with the choice bands 130. Well, actually it'd be 160, because it'd do 80 then times 2. Really good, and Ice Path GX is really good too. Move all damage counters from this Pokemon to your opponent's active Pokemon. So that card right there really helps against Volcanian. Next up we run 2 copies of Tapu Koko for the Flying Flip attack. This attack does 20 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon. And he has free retreat, which is always nice. Next up, we run a card that is very, very good in the format right now. And that card is Espeon EX. For the first attack, Miraculous Shine. De-evolve each of your opponent's evolved Pokemon onto the highest stage evolution card and put it into your opponent's hand. That attack right there is amazing in this deck. What you want to do is start with Tapu Koko, get a couple Flying Flips, Feather Arrow a couple times, where you have about 60 all around the board on your opponent's evolved GXs. And if they rare candied, then you can Miraculous Shine, knocking out all those Pokemon that they rare candied. And even if they didn't, most stage 1s are only 80, so you only have to get a couple more damage counters on there. And next up, we run a single copy of Oranguru. For the Instruct ability, once during your turn, you may draw until you have 3 cards in your hand. And the Psychic attack's not too bad either. For 3 colorless, does 60, then 20 more for each energy attached to your opponent's active. That card's a really good card to run to counter the Alolan Ninetales that prevents EX and GX attacks. And last for the Pokemon lineup, we run 2 copies of Tapu Lele. For the Wonder Tag ability, when you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench, you may search your deck for a supporter card. Reveal it and put it into your hand. And speaking of supporter cards, that's what we move on to next. We run 4 copies of Professor Sycamore, standard in every deck. Discard your hand, draw 7 cards. Still probably the best draw supporter we have. And next, run 4 copies of N. Again, another standard set. Each player shuffles their hand into their decks and draw for their remaining prize cards. Next up, we run 2 copies of Guzma. Really we only run 2 copies of Guzma instead of 3 because Guzma is only for really to trap your opponent, so we can get a lot of flying flips down. You're not really looking to take one-hit knockouts in this deck. Next up, we run 2 copies of Acerola. Put one of your Pokemon that has any damage counters on it, and all cards attached to it, into your hand. That is a very good card. Almost every match I play on the online TCG, Acerola usually always comes in clutch. Next up, we run 2 copies of Bridget. Search your deck for 1 basic Pokemon EX or 3 basic Pokemon and put them onto your bench. Very good card. That's why we run 2, just in case one gets prized. Want to always make sure you have a Bridget. That's the ideal supporter you want to play turn 1. You want to play that, either get 2 Rowlet and a Coco. That's usually my ideal Bridget. But there's different combinations you can do. Next up, we move on to items. We run 4 copies of Ultra Ball. Again, standard in every deck. Discard 2 cards from your hand and choose a Pokemon from your deck. Next, we run 2 copies of Timer Ball. Flip 2 coins for each head. Search your deck for an evolution Pokemon. Reveal it and put it into your hand. Then shuffle your deck. Very good in this deck. Since Decidueye doesn't have Forest of Giant Plants anymore, it needs a good, reliable way to get out its evolutions. So Timer Ball is a really good way of doing that. Next up, we run 3 copies of Rare Candy. Choose one of your basic Pokemon in play. If you have a Stage 2 card in your hand that evolves from that Pokemon, put that card onto the basic Pokemon to evolve it. Again, another great way to get Decidueye out there as quickly as possible. The sooner you get out Decidueye, the better. And next up, for our tool cards, we run 2 copies of Choice Band. Helps us rack up more damage, doing 30 more to EX and GX Pokemon. Then we run 2 copies of Floatstone. Just gives the Pokemon this card's attached to free retreat. Next up, we run 2 copies of Field Blower. Choose up to 2 in any combination of Pokemon tool cards and Stadium cards in play and discard them. Really good for Garbatoxin, because Garbodor's still out there. It's still a good card. But if you actually get enough damage on the board before he gets the Garbatoxin out there, it really doesn't make that big of a deal, because then you can just Miraculous Shine it all off. Next up, we run 2 copies of Revitalizer. Put 2 grass Pokemon from your discard pile into your hand. Really good if your Decidueye is getting knocked out. Next up, we run a single copy of Rescue Stretcher. You can choose one of them, put a Pokemon from your discard pile into your hand, or shuffle 3 Pokemon from your discard pile into your deck. And that is it for the trainers. Next up, we move to energies. Run 4 copies of DCE. And every Pokemon in this deck can use it. And we run 4 grass energies. And that is it for the deck. And there's actually another card I was trying to test in this deck. And that card is Necrozma GX for the Black Ray. This attack does 100 damage to each of your opponent's GX and EX. I thought that would be a pretty good card against Volcanion. I've tested it some online. It really hasn't worked too great, but you can test it if that's something you want to try. Pretty good card if you can utilize it well. Well, that's the deck, guys. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more Primal Swampy videos.